Maccast, Sunday, September 12th, 2021. Hey, Mac Geeks, it's time for your Maccast, the show for Mac Geeks by Mac Geeks. I'm Adam, and this is the show where we discuss all things Macintosh. How you doing? Welcome back to the Maccast. Glad to be sitting down here with you for another episode of Apple Mac news, hints, tips, tricks, all the fun stuff that we talk about in the Apple and Mac community. How you doing? Hopefully you're having a really nice week, day, weekend, whatever it might be. We have, as you might imagine, quite a bit of things to discuss. We are on the eve of our next Apple event. So everything we've been talking about in terms of rumors, specifically around things like the iPhone 13 and the Apple Watch Series 7 and maybe some AirPods, are going to become reality here in a day or two, maybe even by the time you're hearing this podcast, because I never really know when you're listening. But regardless, in this episode, we're going to dive into kind of the latest, what we think Apple is going to be announcing here in a couple days. So we'll get into all that, let you know all the details on how you can watch and be up to date on the event. And of course, expect a Maccast not long after the event, sort of recapping everything and filling you in on all of the juicy details. Because as you know, a lot of times stuff will come out in the event. We get our Apple rainbow colored glasses on, and we might miss a few things here and there. And usually in the analysis, we can get into some of the details. You know, we get all the juicy goodness and things that we want to see and hear, and sometimes miss some of the things that, you know, Apple may just gloss over a little bit. So we'll dig into those details after that. But for today, we're going to really dive into what we might expect. We're going to talk about maybe what's coming next, what's going to happen at the next event, and what other products can we look forward to for the rest of 2021 and into 2022. We've got a lot of news surrounding Apple's or at least one, actually, I guess a couple of Apple's next big things, both Apple Car and some AR/VR headset news. We're going to get into Apple TV Plus stuff. And what else we got to talk about? Delay in Apple's plans for CSAM. We'll talk about that. And we've got some Apple Pay news, some maps, and some other odds and ends. Actually, some news about potential new risk to your iPhone cameras. Apple came out with a support article, and we'll dig in and let you know what that is as well. And that'll round out for the news for this week. And then we've got some recent follow-up on some topics we've been talking about here on the Maccast. We'll talk about Face ID and Touch ID and display technology and all those sorts of things. We've also got some follow-up discussion on how to save space on your Mac. And then we're going to dig into some more of the whole Apple Epic thing. There was a ruling this week, and I want to give you my thoughts and opinions on that and just start the discussion here in our community, maybe find out some of your views on what Apple's going to be doing or being forced to do moving forward in terms of that settlement. And then we'll round things out at the end here with a thing of the moment. I've got a cool thing to share with you that I discovered this week and I think is really, really neat and actually ties into a recent episode of the Maccast. So it should be a great show. Why don't we just dive right in and start talking about what we expect to see happening at Apple's California streaming event. They sent out the invites, and that's the name of this one, California Streaming, probably referring to the fact that, once again, it's going to be a streamed-only event, although it is happening at the Steve Jobs Theater. Probably a lot of the pre-recorded sort of content that Apple's done for the past few announcements here, but it is happening on Tuesday, September 14th at 10 a.m. from the Steve Jobs Theater. And the big announcement we expect, as we've been talking about in all of the rumors, of course, are the next versions of the iPhone 13. Of course, Apple will likely be announcing new, faster processors, an A15. It's expected to have the same core counts as the A14, but be souped up and offer more performance. We are expecting improved camera sensors across the board, including support for a new cinematic video mode, basically portrait mode for your videos, which will be really, really cool. There's also rumored to be an update to the night mode where Apple will detect when there's a night sky and stars and do some enhancements there. Also just some general improvements to night mode, including kind of the color profile that night mode photos have. And Apple's expected to bring ProRes video recording support at least to the iPhone Pro models. We're also expecting to get some increased battery sizes across the lineup, including, and this is kind of a big one, an expected 1 hour usage time update for the mini variant of the iPhone. That's been kind of a big complaint on the iPhone mini, that it doesn't quite have the battery life to get you through an entire day. This will help. I don't know. I think it'll bring it up to about 9 hours, somewhere in that range. So not too shabby, but still not as good as some of the higher end models. The Pro models, while they will have larger batteries, might not see a battery increase, and in some instances might even see a slight decline. That's because they're also expected to get that 120 hertz Pro Motion display, that variable refresh rate display, and that is expected to eat up more batteries. So we'll have to see how Apple spins that one when they talk about that new feature, if it turns out to be true. Along with larger batteries, it's also expected that the iPhones will increase slightly in thickness and it could increase a little bit in terms of weight. So that's kind of the major feature updates. So improved cameras, improved battery life, better processors. Design is expected to stay largely the same, although we are expecting some new colors. We'll talk about that in a minute. Also, we got a little more information on the satellite features that have been rumored to be in there this week, according to Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg. He says the low Earth orbit satellite features will, quote, work only in areas without any cellular coverage and only in select markets. Again, that's expected to not be for telephone calls. It's just going to be an emergency feature. He does claim that Apple is looking to someday deploy its own fleet of satellites to send data to devices, but notes that that's, quote, years from taking off. And I'm assuming he used taking off as a sort of pun in this case when referring to satellites. But don't expect too much from the satellite features. Again, just an emergency feature for in areas where you might not have cell coverage. It'll be interesting to see which select markets Apple is deploying that into. As I mentioned, we are expecting some new colors, if not entirely new designs, right? So iPhone 13 and iPhone 13 mini are expected to be available in black, blue, purple, pink, which would be replacing the green, white, and product red. So a lot of the same colors, but one color replacement. I've heard from a couple of folks in the community already that they're excited about a new pink color coming to an iPhone. And then on the iPhone Pro front, we're expected to get a matte black that's going to replace the graphite color, silver, gold, and a new bronze color, which would be the color for this season, replacing last year's specific blue. And if you remember, the iPhone 11 had the green color. So bronze being the new one, that's an interesting color choice. I'm curious to see what that one looks like. I don't know if I'll be as excited about that as I was about the green and the blue, which I got in the iPhone 11, and the blue in the iPhone 12, which I think is absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. I'll be curious to know, too, in the iPhone 13, if they keep the same color blue or if they adjust that for this year, if that turns out to be one of the color choices. As far as storage options, here's something interesting. We got a lot of conflicting reports this week about options, especially on the lower end models. One report claimed that Apple was dropping the 256 gigabyte option on the iPhone 13 mini and iPhone 13. So it would have gone 64, 128, and then I think 512, if I'm remembering those options right. But that seemed odd to me. And then later in the week, I read a report from Ming-Chi Kuo that said exactly the opposite, that really what Apple was doing across the board was dropping the 64 gigabyte option and sticking with 128 as the base storage size, which I think is a much better move, makes a lot more sense. And that's what I would expect to see at the announcement. Also, we're hearing again on the Pro models that Apple is expected to have a new top-level storage option of 1 terabyte, probably to go along with that new Pro Video option, ProRes Video option, which is going to use up a lot of extra storage. So you're probably going to need that if you're planning on using your iPhone as your videography device. And then good news this week, despite earlier rumors about a possible price increase, newer reports this week are saying that prices across the line should remain the same. So we're not expecting that to go up. Obviously, depending upon your options, especially with that new 1 terabyte storage option, there's going to be higher price points on the top end. But the base price points that this year's models come out in are expected to stay actually the same, and this is despite warnings of component shortages and price increases on processors and stuff like that. Apple looking to maybe not pass that along to consumers, at least not this year. Who knows what we'll see last year. And despite those component shortages, we're also hearing that iPhones will be in various configurations and models, in short supply this year, but there should be availability. So we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. But if you are planning to get an iPhone, you're going to want to jump in early once we know the date for pre-orders, which is expected to probably be this Friday after the announcements, and then iPhones starting to ship usually about a week later. We're also expected at this event to get the new Apple Watch, the Apple Watch Series 7. If you remember, this is expected to have what they're calling a radical new design, really moving to a flat edge design, kind of mimicking the recent designs of the iPhone and iPad. It will have slightly larger displays with reduced bezels, so that'll be nice. And the size of the Apple Watch is going to increase, if you remember, by just about 1 millimeter. So they'll have a 41 millimeter option versus the 40 they have today, and a 45 millimeter option versus the 44 millimeter option that they have with the Apple Watch Series 6. We're not expecting any new health sensors or health capabilities, although some were hoping for blood pressure monitoring. That's probably been pushed off until next year. And while Apple is expected to announce the new watch at the event, there's some debate on whether or not it will be available or how many models will be available. Mark Gurman thinks that there could be a mix of models shipping late or in smaller quantities due to production issues with the new display that have been floating around in the rumor mill, although a more recent report from Ming-Chi Kuo says that Apple has resolved production issues for the Apple Watch Series 7 and that they will, quote, launch on schedule later this month. So I guess you could interpret even Ming-Chi Kuo's statement as launching on schedule doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a lot of availability. It could still be kind of a slow rollout. So again, if you're wanting to get a new Apple Watch Series 7 this year, you're probably going to want to jump in early, get your model ordered, and so you're not stuck kind of waiting or seeing those dates pushed out. So that'll really prove out once we start seeing pre-orders, right? We'll have to see how quickly stuff starts dropping back in terms of the deliverability date, but we often see this with new Apple products. It's usually to be expected. It's just this year we've been hearing about a lot more component shortages. We know that there's been issues in the supply chain for all kinds of reasons, including the current pandemic situation. So we'll just have to wait and see. And then kind of the third product that may be announced, is looking like it will be announced at this event, could be the AirPods 3, the third generation of Apple's original AirPods. They're expected to have a design similar to the AirPods Pro, although no active noise cancellation. So that means shorter stems, a squatter case design. We have heard rumors that the battery case is expected to have about a 20% larger battery, although the AirPods themselves are not expected to have any batteries bigger than what's currently in the AirPods Pro. As far as sound profile, that's not going to change too much, although it is expected that they might do some enhancements in the bass and the lower end. And Ming-Chi Kuo says that Apple will likely keep the AirPods 2 in the lineup, although he wasn't very clear on whether or not that meant that the new AirPods 3 would come out at a higher price point, or if Apple would simply drop the price point of the AirPods 2. I tend to think that they would likely go with the latter, sticking with the AirPods 3 in an offering of $159 without a charging case and $199 with the charging case, and then maybe dropping down the AirPods 2. Be amazing if they could drop that down somewhere around the $99 price point, although they might go, in my mind, with something like $129 for an entry-level set of AirPods. And that should help AirPods sales. I'm curious if many folks are excited about the idea of an AirPods 3, especially if they don't have noise cancellation. That's going to be the big premium feature for AirPods Pro. It's one of my favorite features of the AirPods Pro. So, I like the idea of the smaller stems, though. So maybe that's enough to just push AirPods forward in terms of popularity. But we'll have to wait and see. But that's what's expected for this event. I'm moderately excited about this one. I'm going to be jumping in and getting a new iPhone. I kind of do that every year. I'll be most interested to see what they're doing with the camera improvements. But overall, it just doesn't feel like it's a big year for iPhone. I think I commented on a podcast with Ken Ray that it really feels like an S series year upgrade from the iPhone 12, and really the iPhone 14 is probably where we're going to see some bigger enhancements and improvements. I jumped in on Apple Watch last year because I had a Series 2, so I ended up with a Series 6. I like the idea of a new design. I think it's going to be very, very popular. And a lot of people will probably be upgrading to Apple Watch, but it's not necessarily in my future. And like I said, I'm an AirPods Pro owner, so I'll be waiting to see what Apple does with the next generation of AirPods before I jump in. But I'll be curious, folks in the community, what are you thinking about this event? Are you excited about it? Are you going to be jumping in on some of these new products? And if you are, which ones are you excited about? Shoot me some feedback, send me an email or an audio comment to maccast@gmail.com. And like I said, after the event, within a day or two, I hope to have a new episode of the Maccast out, running through all of the announcements and giving you a lot of my thoughts and opinions on what Apple put out. As far as what might be happening next, the next thing we are expecting is a Mac announcement. We're expecting Apple to announce the update to the MacBook Pros, bringing in the M1X, or next generation of Apple Silicon. That is reportedly still coming in the, quote, next couple weeks, according to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. We're expected to get that new 14-inch model and an update to the 16-inch version of the MacBook Pro, in addition to the new higher-end M1 chips, which sound completely amazing. We're expecting, 10 cores, 8 high-performance cores, and 2 high-efficiency cores. We're expecting new 16 and 32-core GPUs. We're expecting RAM availability in up to 64 gigabytes. So all of the things that Pro owners have been wanting to see from M1 MacBooks that we didn't get with the consumer grade ones. And then Apple really listening to the consumers and doing things like bringing back the MagSafe connector, adding more ports in the form of HDMI ports, SD card slot. It's expected that they're going to have mini LED displays, and that Apple is finally ditching the Touch Bar, which has never proven to be very, very popular among Mac users. So these are looking to be some amazing machines, and it is expected that that will be the next announcement coming from Apple. Don't know what else Apple might be bringing out in that announcement, but I'm sure there might be one or two other things. And believe it or not, the next iPhone is not here yet, and John Prosser, YouTuber and Apple rumorist, is already talking about the next iPhone, the iPhone 14. Actually, he's not alone. We've been getting a few rumors about what's next for iPhone. I feel like it's a little bit early, but hey, let's get into it anyway. It's expected that Apple will finally ditch the notch, although they're going to go with a hole punch front camera array instead. They're saying hole punch front camera. as if it were going to be a single hole. But as we know, the True Depth camera system has a number of sensors and items in there. So if Apple's not going to do a full just under display sort of thing, if they're going to use hole punch, they're going to have to put a few holes, I would imagine, in that display. Prosser says the next version of the iPhone also will not have a camera bump. That's going to finally be ditched, facilitated by an increase in the case thickness, which I would presume would also mean that we'd have a little bit more room for more battery, which would be nice. He's said we're expecting to get a titanium frame. Apple would be returning to round volume buttons like the old school iPhones, the iPhone 4 and iPhone 5. I kind of like that design, honestly, versus the kind of oblong buttons that we have now. So that'll be nice to see. A redesigned speaker and mic grill array along the bottom with elongated slots and mesh covers as opposed to the series of holes that we have in the iPhone today. And it is expected that Apple will retain the Lightning connector. So still not moving to USB-C even on the next generation of the iPhone. So sounds like a lot of nice updates. Again, this is very, very early speculation. Like anything you're hearing about now, in my opinion, could be totally thrown out the window by this time next year, but interesting to think about nonetheless. We're also hearing that Apple may bring under display Face ID technology. So maybe not punch hole. That's still maybe in the cards. And they expect that next year Apple will ditch the mini in the lineup and just go with 4 different iPhones in 2 different sizes, a 6.1-inch model and a 6.7-inch model in the non-Pro and Pro versions. So we're looking at an iPhone 14, an iPhone 14 Max, iPhone 14 Pro, and an iPhone 14 Pro Max. And that feels like the right mix to me. Maybe, though, Apple could still throw in a mini model if this new updated version of the iPhone mini proves to be popular. It really hasn't been so far, which is why I think Apple is really considering potentially ditching the model, even though there's at least a few people, at least in this community, that really prefer the smaller phone size. So might be a little bit disappointment, but maybe maybe the update to the iPhone SE could happen in the first quarter of next year, and maybe that will fill the gap for those folks who desire a smaller sized phone. We also got a little bit of information this week on the next generation of Apple Watch Series 8. In a brief note, Ming-Chi Kuo noted that Apple could bring temperature measurement to the next version of Apple Watch, so that's at least one new health feature. I have a feeling that they're going to try and squeeze in a few more. Maybe blood pressure monitoring is something else we've been hearing about, and possibly a few other things. But we will have to wait and see, at least for another year. Let's get through this year's products, right? This is a little bit weird that we're talking about this stuff, but hey. Also, we're hearing about the next update to AirPods Pro. That could happen sooner, sometime in 2022. Apple is reportedly already testing some new designs, potentially dropping the stems completely, having a styling closer mimicking what Apple released with their Beats Studio Pro buds, and possible improvements to the active noise cancellation, so making that better, which would be a nice thing. And then maybe even adding in some sensors to provide additional health functionality along with Apple Watch and Apple Fitness, which is, again, that's a rumor that's been around for a long, long time, that they could add like heart rate monitoring to the AirPods, just like they have in the Apple Watch. So I don't know if that would be supplemental or in addition to the Apple Watch health features, but again, more health sensors coming to Apple products in the near future. And then a little bit of news around what might be next for Apple Silicon. There is some indication, or at least some potential indication, that Apple is looking to move away from ARM, although it might not be in the main processor per se. So there is a recent job posting that was noticed by Tom's Hardware, where Apple is looking for a RISC-V high-performance programmer. RISC-V is actually an open source architecture instruction set that's an alternative to the ARM RISC instruction set that Apple currently licenses for its processors. And right now, Apple has to pay a licensing fee for every ARM core that they use. And as cores go up and as ARM is used in more and more Apple processors, you can imagine that might get expensive, and Apple may be looking to move away from that. So it could be that they're looking to take a more hybrid approach with using some ARM cores and some RISC-V cores. They also have companion processors and other processors that use RISC technology within their devices that are using ARM. So they could be looking at, some specific chipsets moving to the open source RISC-V chipset. So it may be that the main A series and M series processors stick with the ARM licensing, but other processors move to RISC-V. So, it's not a given that, hey, they're looking to completely move away from ARM at this point, but it's an interesting listing nonetheless, and maybe gives a little bit of indication on where Apple is what Apple is looking to in terms of technologies for future versions of their processors. And so that's kind of the latest on what we expect next from Apple. And now it seems like that, iPhone rumor season has started to wane, or again, maybe not, because we're already starting to get rumors of iPhone 14. But at least this week, there was a lot of attention that had turned to what might be one of Apple's next big moves. And it's, something we've been talking about for years now, but Apple Car. The project has been, as you know, sort of on and off again for years, with management and focus shifting several times. Rumors of the car project go all the way back to as early as 2014, but they really started to heat up around 2015. And then you may remember that in 2017, there seemed to be a big focus shift on the project, moving away from actually developing maybe a vehicle to more looking at autonomous vehicle systems and AI technologies and those sorts of things. Well, now DigiTimes is claiming that Apple has been in talks with car makers like Toyota, and also in talks with Japanese and Asian suppliers like LG and SK Group, targeting a 2024 release timeframe for an actual Apple car. And how they are going to get there is in a little bit of debate. There's been newer reports out of Korea claiming that Apple has had to forego searching for an auto industry manufacturing partner. So they had been talking to Kia reportedly, also to BMW, a bunch of different car companies about potentially partnering to actually produce and manufacture an Apple car. These latest reports, although they seem a little bit iffy, say that Apple might be looking to proceed on its own instead. And according to reports, Apple has been sending out requests for information, requests for proposals, and requests for quotations to global automobile parts manufacturers. So looking for parts and then maybe looking into doing their own manufacturing. And the reason for this seems to be competition and time, as reportedly many of the automakers that they were talking with about partnering, those companies are already focused on development of their own electric and autonomous vehicles. And so they don't really have time for Apple. And they're also looking at Apple as a potential competitor. So, why would they want to produce a vehicle for Apple? So Apple may be looking to do it on their own, but we'll have to wait and see. That seems like a really tall order, but Apple's made big plans and shot for the stars many, many times and come out ahead and proven that they can do it. And they definitely have the financial resources to maybe pull it off. I think a lot of us, when Apple said they were going to do a phone, thought they were a little bit crazy, but look where we are now. So as crazy, at least in my mind, as an Apple car seems, an actual Apple vehicle, if any company could potentially pull it off, I think they actually could. And they've hired a lot of very smart people and a lot of great engineering talent to kind of get the job done. Although that's been a little bit in flux too, as we'll talk about here just in a minute. But one of the big things behind Apple Car reportedly is some breakthrough battery technology, which is a really big deal. And this comes from a Reuters report. They say that Apple has a battery technology that will radically reduce the cost of batteries and also offer increased range. And Apple is expected to manufacture EV batteries in the U.S., so they might be looking for manufacturing partners, or again, could potentially build their own battery facilities for manufacturing batteries for their vehicles. And then, according to recent LinkedIn profiles spotted by Mac Rumors, Apple appears to have recently hired a couple of former Mercedes-Benz engineers to work on the Apple Car project, and that includes Dr. Anton Usselman, who has a doctorate in mechatronics and has worked on steering systems at Mercedes as well as Porsche. So, again, that would be really helpful in terms of autonomous vehicles, and looks like to be a hire that will help Apple out in that area. And then apparently Apple did recently lose one of the major players on their Apple Car project, Doug Field. And when I say lose, they lost him again, and this is according to Bloomberg, and this time he is going to Ford. Field was the VP on the special projects team and was overseeing kind of the day-to-day efforts of the Apple Car project team. Apple's John Giandrea is the Senior Vice President of Machine Learning and AI Strategy. He reportedly is leading the entire project, but really Field was doing the day-to-day efforts, and he was at Apple in 2013 when Tesla hired him away, and then he returned back to Apple in 2018, and now he appears to be going back to Ford, where he started his career way back in 1987. So he's bounced around a lot and been in and out. We'll have to see if he makes his way back to Apple at some point. But basically, not long after it was reported that Field was leaving, another Bloomberg report said that Apple Watch head Kevin Lynch, who's VP of Technology, would be stepping in to take over for Field. Now, Lynch had been brought into the car project reportedly to manage the teams developing the underlying software, and that's kind of where Lynch's expertise is and his background is more in software. Presently, Lynch reports to Apple's COO, Jeff Williams, although it's not clear if now that he's taking over the car project, if that will change, and he'll be reporting to John Giandrea at this point. But, you know, does anybody else kind of think it's a little bit odd that a guy who led the development of Flash, a technology that Apple fought really, really hard to kill off, is now in charge of what might be Apple's next big thing? Yeah, what a strange world we live in. Now, that's not a knock on Lynch, because no one can deny the amazing work he's done in leading the Apple Watch project. The Apple Watch is an amazing project with a product with a lot of great features. But it's just funny to me how the tech world works. Like, Lynch came over from Adobe and again was working on Flash, and he tends to be a software guy. So the idea now that he's going to be in charge of both the hardware and software around Apple Car is a really, really interesting thing, but obviously Apple has faith in him, and again, I think he's done amazing work so far, so no reason to necessarily doubt him. Hopefully he can keep the Apple Car project moving forward, but it does kind of also, I think, put a nod toward the fact that when it comes to smart cars and autonomous vehicles, software is probably a very, very, very big part of it, right? The software has to be really, really good, and having somebody who's good at that in charge is probably ultimately a really good thing. One other interesting development this week in terms of Apple Car, there's some evidence that Apple may have been the buyer of a 5,000 plus acre proving ground facility, a track in Arizona, formerly owned by Chrysler. They've been looking to sell it, and they did get a buyer. It's all done through a holding company, and it's hard to kind of trace and track down who might have bought this, but it was a purchase for $125 million cash. It's land consisting of 34 separate parcels, and you'd have to have deep pockets to pick that up. Apple had reportedly been using the facility, again, under the guise of this kind of holding company. So it would make sense that if Apple is digging deeper and diving deeper into car development, that they need a place to do testing and proving. And so this facility could make sense for Apple. And it looks like they may potentially have been the buyer. So Apple definitely stepping up their Apple Car efforts. And, if they are targeting like a 2024 release or launch of that product, it makes sense that they're going to be ramping this up. So expect to hear a lot more rumors and things going on around Apple Car in the future. But that's kind of the latest of what we know is going on. It looks like there has been enough pushback from the community and security researchers and folks about Apple's new CSAM scanning efforts that they have decided to delay the rollout of that feature. In a statement to 9to5Mac, Apple said, quote, "Based on feedback from customers, advocacy groups, researchers, and others, we've decided to take additional time over the coming months to collect input and make improvements before releasing these critically important child safety features." If you may remember, the new features were scheduled to roll out by the end of the year as part of the updates to iOS 15, iPadOS 15, and macOS Monterey. It included a feature that would scan photos uploaded to iCloud for potential child sexual abuse material or CSAM material. You probably remember the system that Apple developed would use on-device matching via image hashes matched against an image hash database provided by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and other child safety organizations. Apple made the announcement and then quickly came under fire from a number of organizations, and I think they've done the right thing in deciding to maybe take a pause and roll back a little bit to kind of better assess and communicate how they are actually going to be rolling out these features and what they're going to be doing. Apple's update also included new parental controls for messages to protect children from sharing and viewing explicit images, as well as updated knowledge information for Siri and Search. Those features also appear to be part of this delay. So Apple taking a little bit more time, I think that's ultimately a good thing. We'll have to wait and see what they do. A lot of folks really feel like Apple shouldn't be doing these kinds of features at all. And as we've discussed here, there's definitely room for debate. So if you have a thought or opinion on what Apple's doing on their delay, let us know what you think. Shoot me an email, send me an audio comment, maccast@gmail.com. So we already kind of discussed one of Apple's potential next big things in the form of the Apple Car. The other potential next big thing that we've often talked about here on the MacCast is their AR, augmented reality, and VR, virtual reality headset plans. This week we got some new information from The Information. They claim that the first version of Apple's AR, VR headset, those chips are ready for trial production, so Apple is rolling forward. TSMC will be reportedly developing the chips for the device, and those are at least at this point a year away from mass production. But again, they are going into early trial production, which means that Apple is kind of solidifying on what the first release product might look like. The SoCs are reportedly not as powerful as the chips that we would find in other Apple devices, in the form of they won't have things like AI or machine learning, so they won't have the neural engine built into them. And because of that, information says that the first generation of the headsets will require being tethered via a wireless connection to a phone, computer, or a tablet for handling, processing, and controlling things like the displaying of virtual, mixed, and augmented reality images. So it's going to function a little bit more like Apple Watch in terms of at least the first version of the device. Apple has also reportedly finished designing the image sensors and the display drivers for the headset, though it's being reported that it's, quote, unusually large. So I don't know what that means for the actual size of the product, but again, this first version is expected to be sort of a mounted headset, so actual like VR type goggles that will also have augmented reality functionality. The first version of this headset could be released as soon as 2020, although it is expected that after Apple debuts this first headset, they will follow up probably in the next year with a more refined pair of AR glasses, something that's more like just standard glasses, and that's expected sometime in 2023. So that's kind of what's going on with the latest efforts around Apple's AR VR projects. We have a lot of Apple TV Plus news to dive into this week, starting off with Dickinson, one of Apple's popular series that is going to end with season 3, which will air on November 5th. This is according to Variety. Now, creator and showrunner Elena Smith says in a statement that it's actually planned that, quote, when I set out to make Dickinson, I envisioned the show as a 3-season journey. So it's not necessarily that this one's getting canceled. It just was reportedly planned for 3 seasons, although I think this is the second Apple TV Plus series to end after Little Voice, which actually only saw a single season before being canceled, and that one was actually canceled. Apple picked up a new documentary that they announced, and it is expected to premiere on November 26th. This is according to Deadline. The documentary is called The Fight Before Christmas, and it's a story of a lawyer and Christmas lover, Jeremy Morris, who wanted to plan the biggest community Christmas event in America in his neighborhood, but was shut down by his homeowners association. The documentary covers the fight over the event that then, quote, snowballs out of control. There's another one of those puns. And the film is going to be directed by Becky Reed, who produced the documentary, documentary Three Identical Strangers, So that's coming out November 26th. Sounds very interesting. I'm not sure that's kind of the happy, upbeat holiday movie you'd expect coming from Apple, but I'm a big fan of documentaries, and this one sounds very, very interesting, and I guess could be entertaining and funny, depending upon how they spin it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one. Here's an interesting thing. On the Rocks, Apple's film with Bill Murray is going to be released to Blu-ray and DVD next month, and this is going to be the first Apple TV Plus movie that will be made available on physical media. So I'm not sure why that one, maybe because it's a Sofia Coppola thing, but yeah, On the Rocks, good enough, I guess, to get a release in Blu-ray and DVD, and that is happening again next month. Apple has picked up 3 new kids shows that are coming to the platform. This is, again, according to Variety. Wolf Boy and the Everything Factory, Get Rolling with Otis, and Puppy Palace are 3 new offerings from Apple TV Plus for kids. Wolf Boy and Everything Factory is the first to be released, and it is a 10-episode animated series executive produced by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who also has a new show out on Apple TV Plus, Mr. Corman. Hit Record, Bento Box Entertainment, and Michael Ryan are also producing. It will premiere on Apple TV Plus on September 24th. Get Rolling with Otis is based on the popular book series published by Penguin Random House, and it's about a little tractor with a big heart. And then Puppy Palace is based on a book series by Scholastic, and it's about a brother and sister who love dogs, and it details their experiences fostering puppies. So 3 great new kids shows coming to Apple TV Plus, and then also one popular kids TV series coming to Apple TV Plus, Yo Gabba Gabba. That was announced with a partnership between Apple TV Plus and WildBrain. A lot of folks I know are big fans of Yo Gabba Gabba. Yo Gabba Gabba episodes and specials will release exclusively on Apple TV Plus, and Apple is actually ordering the production of 20 new half-hour episodes, but they're also going to carry the 66 episodes of the series that were already produced as part of its back catalog content. And Apple doesn't have a ton of back catalog stuff, but they have all of the Peanuts things, and also you may remember they have the entire back catalog of Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock on the service as well. So Apple picking up another existing program along with back catalog content, although they seem to be currently focused on kids shows for back catalog. Hopefully they start expanding that into some other series. We'll have to see what happens in 2022. But a new report from Information claims that they have the current subscriber numbers from someone in the know at Apple. These are numbers that Apple does not disclose themselves, but the report claims that Apple's TV service has 40 million subscribers as of this summer, with about half of those being paid subscribers. The report also says that Apple plans to spend a lot more money on marketing Apple TV Plus and Apple TV Plus shows in 2022. As a matter of fact, they say Apple's going to spend about $500 million in marketing, and they are going to be looking to ramp up their releases of new content to the service, with at least one new original TV show or movie premiering every week in 2022. So Apple getting a lot more aggressive about the rollout of the TV service. We'll have to wait and see what that does for their subscriber numbers. The report also claims to have insight into why Apple has not produced an inexpensive Apple TV stick, something a lot of people would like to see them do. There's been a lot of complaints, and we've talked about it on the podcast, about Apple not having a low-cost offering for bringing Apple TV content to your television. It was something that was actually proposed by Apple executive Tim Twerdahl when he came to Apple in 2017 after he had worked at places like Amazon, Roku, and Netflix. Tim thought it would make the Apple TV more affordable for people to gain access to the service, and while that would likely be true, he was overruled by Greg Joswiak and Phil Schiller, who are worried that an inexpensive hardware product would lower Apple's reputation as being a premium brand. So they decided instead to opt for reaching the low end of the market by developing an Apple TV Plus app for the lower cost products from companies like Samsung, Roku, and Amazon. So we know that we have the TV app available on those devices. You can get in at a lower cost. But as we talked about on this podcast, they don't have kind of the integrated experience that the Apple TV does. So Apple did definitely maintain their higher price point and higher premium brand profile with the Apple TV. And if you want to get in cheaper, you do have an option, although it does, in my mind, diminish the experience quite a bit. You know, you can also get the TV app that's built into some smart televisions as well. I have that on my Samsung Smart TV, and I've tried to use it. It's just not the same as the Apple TV, but it covers all areas of the market, and I think it probably, in my mind, was the right strategy. But I'd love to know what you think about that. Do you think Apple should have done a TV stick and made the wrong choice, or did they make the right move? Shoot me some feedback. Send me an email, maccast@gmail.com. And as you know, I am a big fan of Apple Pay, but it looks like despite another report that showed mobile tap-to-pay payments being up and that Apple Pay was one of the preferred ways to tap to pay, there's a new report this week that shows overall people who have Apple Pay or have access to Apple Pay don't appear to be using it. This comes from a new survey from Payments. They said that 93.9% of consumers in the U.S. who have Apple Pay activated on their iPhones do not use it in store to pay for purchases. This is based on a Payments national study of 3,671 U.S. consumers conducted between August 3rd and August 10th of 2021. The survey also showed that Apple Pay adoption still is about the same as it was at launch in 2015, only up about 1% at around 5%. And they say the main reason Apple Pay is not taking off as a tap-to-pay payment option for a lot of consumers is because contactless credit and debit cards are being issued now, and they don't require additional authentication to use like Face ID or Touch ID. Now, they said that in the report, but I find that a little bit confusing because I'm pretty sure that if you use a contactless credit or debit card, don't you have to enter a PIN? I prefer to use Apple Pay because Face ID, Touch ID, those are very fast technologies. As a matter of fact, using Apple Pay on the Apple Watch is even better because you don't even have to authenticate that way. You're already authenticated on your Apple Watch, so you just go ahead and use it. So I don't know. it's interesting to see that that's why people aren't using Apple Pay. But 94% of consumers not using Apple Pay. Why aren't you using Apple Pay? It is great. I absolutely love it. And I know anybody who does use it or who starts to use it instantly gets hooked on it. So hopefully Apple can maybe do something to change that. I don't know, maybe a little bit more marketing on the convenience. They haven't really promoted it too much, but it is available almost everywhere now. So it's very convenient to use. And if you haven't tried it out, I would encourage you to give it a shot and use it on a regular basis. Because again, I really, really think it's great. Good news, if you are in Italy, Apple has finally rolled out its Apple Map improvements in that country, along with San Marino, Vatican City, and Andorra. This is according to Mac Stories. Feature updates include more detailed maps with 3D buildings, look around, which is absolutely amazing. If you haven't had a chance to use look around, you should definitely at least check it out. I think it is amazing. That's Apple's version of Street View, and I think it kicks Google's version's butt, at least in my opinion. It is awesome. The new map features also include lane guidance, speed camera data, natural language guidance, and improved navigation. So you can get all of that, again, in Italy, San Marino, Vatican City, and Andorra now. And then last bit of thing in the news for this week, some bad news for motorcycle drivers if they use their iPhone, especially for navigation. Apple put up a new support document that I'll link to in the show notes at maccast.com that says the cameras on their iPhones could be permanently damaged by exposure to certain vibrational frequencies, such as those generated by high-power motorcycle engines. Specifically, camera lenses with optical image stabilization or closed-loop autofocus, which is a lot of the lenses that are on more modern iPhones. Apple says those are susceptible to this kind of damage because of their gyroscopes and or magnetic sensors. Apple is recommending that consumers do not directly attach their iPhones to the handlebars or chassis of their motorcycles, as the vibrations could result in damage to the iPhone. They're also recommending for lower powered vehicles like scooters or electric mopeds that users use vibration dampening mounts to minimize the chance of any damage. And there's no real clear reason why Apple is suddenly announcing this now. If it just was maybe recently discovered that this was kind of happening, but we have seen some reports online from motorcycle owners of their cameras being damaged, and this looks like it could likely be the cause. So if you are a motorcycle driver and you've been using your iPhone in this way, you might consider stopping. I have a feeling we might see accessory manufacturers coming out with some pretty innovative solutions to maybe counter this, because I have to imagine that there's a lot of people out there that drive motorcycles that really like attaching their iPhones to their bikes. And maybe we can find a technical way around this limitation. But for now, just something to be aware of, especially if you own a motorcycle and an iPhone. And with that, that is going to do it for the news for this week. Before we move on, I do want to take a quick moment and thank a show sponsor, and that is LinkedIn Jobs. You know, today, many small business owners are busier than ever, and time spent searching for and interviewing candidates can take time away from managing and growing a business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs has made it easier to get the candidates worth interviewing faster, and it's free. And I have to tell you, I know firsthand how successful finding talent on LinkedIn Jobs can be, because that's actually how I landed my most current job. And my employer also takes advantage of LinkedIn Jobs to network through its existing employees, and we have found and hired amazing talent, I have to tell you, through LinkedIn. So great way to find new employees for your company. And you can use LinkedIn Jobs to create a free job post in minutes. You can reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 750 million people. Focus on candidates with the skills and experience you need. Use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified people, and then use the simple tools on LinkedIn Jobs to quickly filter and prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates worth interviewing faster. Did you know every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/maccast. That's linkedin.com/maccast to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And a big thank you to LinkedIn Jobs for their support of the MacCast. I have a couple bits of follow-up from a few things we've been talking about on recent episodes of the MacCast. Something that's been coming up in the news quite a bit, including the news today, is that future iPhones may replace Face ID or bring back Touch ID technology with under-display versions of that tech. And I think I made some comments recently about the fact that one of the only reasons it seemed like Apple might bring Touch ID back in the form of an under-display technology would be potentially to replace Face ID so that they could get rid of the notch. And Dwayne wrote in to remind me, and I think this was very appropriate, that the notch is there for the camera system, the TrueDepth camera system, and the TrueDepth camera system isn't just exclusive for Face ID. So even if Apple were to bring under-display Touch ID technology there, you would still want and need the TrueDepth camera system for other features like portrait selfies and some of the AI stuff that they do with Memoji and other apps used for, doing all kinds of interesting features. So they can't just literally get rid of the notch necessarily and the TrueDepth camera system, which may be why we're hearing Apple looking at, through-hole technologies or maybe under-display technologies for Touch ID. And so it's more likely, and I appreciate the correction, Dwayne, that under-display Touch ID would be in addition to and not a replacement for the TrueDepth camera system and presumably Face ID. But more recently, like we've been hearing, it seems like Apple really would like to do under-display Face ID technology and then keep that. And that was kind of part of my main argument that, Face ID is a better biometric technology. It's more accurate, more secure than Touch ID. So I was trying to understand why they would want to bring Touch ID back. I guess as an alternate authentication system for cases where Touch ID or where Face ID might not work as well, like you have face coverings and those sorts of things, it could be a good alternative. So we'll have to wait and see what Apple does. But it was a great point made by Dwayne, and I wanted to make sure that we discussed that. On the last episode of the MacCast, we also talked about a listener who was having issues with an M1 Mac where he was getting error messages about running out of available system memory. And specifically, it seems to happen around the browser and having like a lot of tabs open for various websites. That's where we're mostly seeing it. And we talked about sort of memory management and how memory works on Macs these days, on modern Macs. And a big part of that is the use of swap. And with SSDs, it's not really a problem. So basically taking stuff that's in memory when the system's running out of physical memory and moving that out to the disk. And so one thing that can be a problem is when your disk is really, really full. And so we were talking about different ways to make sure that you have at least 10% of available disk space on your main boot drive. And Daniel wrote in to point out an area that often becomes a problem, and that can be if you're doing physical iOS device backups. So you're not using iCloud, but you're actually backing up locally your iOS devices on your Mac by physically connecting them or connecting them over Wi-Fi and running backups on a periodic basis. Those backup files get stored locally and can quickly actually use up disk space, especially if you have a number of devices. So if you have an iPhone, say with a 512 gigabyte drive on it, and that's pretty full, and you have an iPad with a terabyte drive on it, and that's pretty full, yeah, that storage all gets backed up to your local storage system on your Mac and can use up your Mac's disk space. And those backups are stored in the mobile sync folder of your home library folder. So if you go into Library Application Support Mobile Sync, you'll see a backup folder and all of your backups are there. Now, they're kind of cryptically named in these folders with kind of hash names, so it's hard to tell which is which unless you actually go into the Finder or into iTunes if you're on an older Mac. But if you have Mac OS Catalina or later, you manage your devices in the Finder. So if you select the device in the Finder, go under Locations and then look at Manage Backups, or click on the Manage Backups button, then you can see the individual backups for a particular device, and you can actually delete those backups from there. Oftentimes, there will be multiple backups, or there might be older backups, so that could be taking up additional storage space as well. And so you can delete them. I would recommend you don't delete your only backup, though. So if you have more than one, great. If you only have one backup, you might want to save that off someplace else before you delete it, or turn on iCloud backups and back up to iCloud as well as locally so you have multiple backups. But that is definitely a place to look for doing some space savings. If you still need to back up locally, but you just don't have a lot of available disk space, Daniel also did point me to an article, and I will link to it in the show notes at maccast.com. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, but it provides instructions on how to move your mobile sync backups to an external drive by setting up symlinks and doing some things with permissions and stuff like that. Now, I will tell you, I personally generally don't recommend that people do this because I've not had good experiences on my own moving default system folders and functions out to external drives. I know there's a lot of people who like to move their home folders to external drives, which is something that you can do as well. But Apple relies on those folders being in specific locations and kind of having specific permission sets on them. And so it can be difficult to manage. It can cause problems. It can be hard to troubleshoot when you start running into issues. So I generally don't recommend it, but Daniel said he tried this out. He's had good success with it. It's working for him very, very well, and it definitely is an option. So I wanted to point you to it in case it's an option that you might want to take advantage of, but just be aware, make sure you have good backups and all that sort of stuff, all the things we talk about here on the Maccast. But I thought it was a great suggestion, and definitely at the very least, taking a look at the folder and seeing if you have extra backups or backups that you no longer need, you could definitely clean those off and probably get a lot of disk space back on your Mac. So worth looking into, and thank you, Daniel, for pointing that one out. So another big thing that happened this week in the news was the ruling came back in the Epic versus Apple lawsuit. And you all know that lawsuits are not my favorite thing to talk about here on the Maccast. And the announcement of the ruling in this case is actually a good example of why. Because the ruling comes out, and we get all these kinds of reports about the judgment and what it means for Apple and what it means for Epic and who won and who lost. And more importantly, what it means for us and developers. And all the reports are a giant mess of confusion and debate. So if you've been reading these articles, depending upon who you're reading it from or whose tweets you're following or who in the community is talking about it, it's not really clear exactly what it means. And I think that's because it's legal stuff, right? Nobody actually really knows. And really in the short term, it doesn't really matter. And this is why I don't like talking about lawsuits, because there's going to be appeals and everything is going to be pending for a very, very long time. And actually there are already appeals, or at least claims that appeals are going to be being filed. And yeah, it's nuts, but let's try to discuss it and let's try to understand it anyway. I'll give you my take on what's going on and basically the top level breakdown of where we wound up. Apple is claiming, a massive victory. Epic is claiming that they lost and, they're going to be appealing. I don't think it's 100% that clear, but here's what's going on. There were basically 10 claims that were made. Apple supposedly won like 9 of them, or the rulings went 9 in favor of Apple and then 1 kind of against Apple. the kind of big points for Apple is, one, the judge found and ruled that they are not an antitrust monopolist, at least in the sub-market for mobile gaming transactions. So they kind of narrowly defined that. I don't know what that means for some of the other antitrust stuff that Apple is potentially going through, especially with like Congress and governments and those sorts of things. But at least in this Epic case, for the sub-market of mobile gaming transactions, the finding was Apple is not a monopoly. There was also a ruling in favor of Apple's claim that Epic Games was in breach of their Apple Store contract, and that means that Epic is going to have to pay Apple 30% of the $12.1 million in revenue that they earned between August and October of 2020. That's when they implemented that alternate payment system. So the monies that was earned from the alternate payment system, they owe Apple the 30% on that because that was their contract. And they also owe 30% of any revenue earnings from November 20th until today. They found that Apple was within their legal rights to terminate the Epic Game Developers account, so they don't have to reinstate Epic Games as their developer account. But the main ruling that went against Apple was that the court did find that Apple's conduct in enforcing what they call anti-steering restrictions is anti-competitive, and it's the remedy for this, in my mind, that gets confusing thanks to the legalese. So I'll read you what the remedy for the anti-steering is, and this is what the indictment or the ruling says. Apple is permanently restrained and enjoined from prohibiting developers from including in their apps and their metadata buttons, external links, or other calls to action that direct customers to purchasing mechanisms in addition to in-app purchasing, and communicating with customers through points of contact obtained voluntarily from customers through account registration from within the app. And so essentially, as near as I can tell. Oh, and by the way, this ruling goes into effect in 90 days, supposedly. But I'm guessing that Apple is going to file an appeal and file to have it withheld while it works on that appeal, which is a very common thing. So this is probably not even going to go into effect, at least not immediately. But let's just say it does. So what does this actually mean? Well, some believe it's actually clear evidence that Apple has to allow in-app purchases from other services because it says, metadata, buttons, external links, or other calls to action that direct customers to purchasing mechanisms in addition to in-app purchasing. So a lot are interpreting that to mean, hey, you can have a button in your app that allows you to do an in-app purchase that's not Apple's in-app purchase. Most others, though, don't feel that it's interpreted that way and it's that clear. Most feel that what this is allowing developers to do is point to and make available payment alternatives that are available outside the app and on the web. And you can actually let customers know about those options and that, hey, there's a cheaper option to get this subscription versus the in-app purchase. You can go here to get it. So you can link to it. You can put a button linking out to it. And interestingly, it seems like Epic is in that latter group because they did announce that they're going to be appealing this ruling and that they're not going to bring Fortnite back to iOS until they can actually offer their own in-app payment service. So in their mind, this isn't going to allow them to do that. I agree that the latter interpretation is likely the correct one, but it is really up to the courts to decide. And actually, that's part of this language as well, is they're in control of deciding, how this rule gets applied. And as a recent Verge piece pointed out, my guess is that we're going to see developers kind of push to see what exactly this ruling means and how Apple sort of responds to it. So I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of apps get submitted with alternative in-app payment methods built into them. And then we're going to have to wait to see how Apple responds to that. If they shut those out, if they block those apps, and then there's going to be more impending lawsuits saying that Apple's in violation of this. And then there's going to be the arguments about, is Apple in violation of this enjoining order, or are they in the right? And is it only applying to the ability to link to outside payment options and those sorts of stuff? So again, fun times. This is the fun times we get into with lawsuits, right? And so that's what's really frustrating for me about all of these. We could be covering these over and over again and having the same conversations over and over again about what this means and where it's going and that sort of stuff. Really, in my mind, I wish Apple would just recognize and understand what developers are asking for and what consumers and customers are asking for, and do the right things to make those easier. And really, I feel like their in-app purchase system is so far superior to any other option that they could just let that stand on its own merits. Like, I think a lot of people still would opt to use Apple's system, even if there were other options and cheaper options available to them. And I think even if you had developers that didn't implement Apple's in-app purchase systems, I think a lot of folks would put pressure on those companies to actually offer it as an option. Even if it was, hey, you have to pay a little bit more. I think there's a lot of people, and we've heard from people in this community that have said, hey, I would pay a little bit more to have the security, convenience, and privacy that Apple offers with their system versus using some other system. But just having an alternative available isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not binary, and I think Apple really looks at it as a binary thing. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. I'd love to hear your opinions on this. I think regardless, what we're seeing is that Apple is going to have to make some changes, and probably some more substantial changes, right? They really haven't changed anything at this point, and with this current ruling, I don't think they're really changing much, right? They do have to allow these links. They have to allow this marketing, something I think they should have allowed all along. And obviously the court saw that as anti-competitive in this case. And so this is how we're moving forward. This is what Apple is going to have to conform with, at least at some point, maybe, right? Again, I think the way legal stuff is, they're going to file an appeal, and they're going to ask that this be stayed until that appeals goes through. So I don't think it's going to be happening in the next 90 days, but watch. We'll just have to watch and wait and see. But again, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. Shoot me an email, send me an audio comment, maccast@gmail.com. Have one more thing to talk to you about in this episode, and it is a really cool thing of the moment. I actually found out about this thanks to a great blog post over at iDownload blog. I'll link to it in the show notes at maccast.com. And I'll also link to this great set of wallpapers. And what it is, thing of the moment this week, iPod socks wallpapers. Yes, amazing, amazing wallpapers that pay homage to one of the forgotten apples that I covered in a recent episode of the Maccast. If you haven't heard that, go back and listen to it, especially if you don't know what Apple socks are, or iPod socks rather, are. And the creator of this, a guy that goes by Basic Apple Guy at basicappleguy.com. I'll have a link to the wallpapers in the show notes at maccast.com as well. Says he has a, quote, disproportionate, bordering on irrational adoration for iPod socks. And because of that, he thoroughly studied the stitching and the patterns of the iPod socks and says, quote, each pixel of these wallpapers was lovingly mouse clicked by hand. And I absolutely believe him, because when you see these are gorgeous. It's like vector art at a meticulous level, and I absolutely love it. They're great backgrounds for your iPhone, and you really should check these out. Check out his blog. Also, he has a ton of other great wallpaper designs and work, some great posts related to Apple, well worth reading, and I absolutely kind of fell in love with it. So I'm going to be following Basic Apple Guy and reading his blog a lot more from now on. And thanks to iDownload Blog for pointing that out. So if you haven't run across this, definitely check it out. Links in the show notes at maccast.com. But with that, that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Before I leave you, I do want to thank my show sponsor, Smile, makers of Text Expander. You can get more information and details on their software by visiting smilesoftware.com/podcast. Bandwidth for the Maccast is provided by Cashfly. You can find them at CACHEFLY.com. And all advertising on the Maccast is handled by Backbeat Media. They are at backbeatmedia.com. As always, I love hearing from you. If you have a comment, a question, something you'd like to hear covered on a future episode of the Maccast, you can send your emails and audio comments to maccast@gmail.com. You can also call in on the listener hotline and leave a voicemail. That phone number, 281-622-4269, 281-MAC-I-AM-9. And if you need show notes, links to anything that I talked about on this or any other episode of the Maccast, you'll find those on the website. That's at maccast.com. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can find me on Twitter, twitter.com/Maccast. You can check out the Maccast Facebook page over at facebook.com/the-Maccast, or find me on Instagram, Maccast on Instagram. But with that, that is going to do it for now. Until next time, I will talk to you all again real soon.